The night the city's lights went out, I stood on the terrace and watched 1,000 wings rise from the rooftops. That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic villain or a sudden catastrophe, just a simple, brutal truth. The place I'd called home was dying, and nobody seemed to notice but me. My family had laughed the first time I whispered about turning rooftops into gardens, about coaxing bees back into concrete veins. "You're a fool," my brother said, slamming his laptop shut. "Nobody wants a garden on a steel beam," my mother added, her voice dripping with pity. Their words hit like a cold wind, but they also lit a fire I could not extinguish. I walked away that night with a backpack full of notebooks, a jar of honeybees, and a single stubborn conviction. My theories on urban pollination weren't delusions, they were a lifeline. I left the university's prestigious facade behind, resigned from the research team that called my ideas science fiction, and moved into a cramped apartment above a laundromat. The rent was cheap, the walls thin, and the only thing louder than the machines was the chorus of doubt in my own head. Every day I set out with a single beehive strapped to my back, climbing fire escape stairwells, slipping through maintenance doors, and planting wildflower seed mixes in the cracks between concrete. My neighbors called me the Bee Lady, a nickname that started as mockery and soon became a badge of curiosity. I built a network of rooftop gardens, each one a tiny sanctuary buzzing with life. I tracked pollinator activity with cheap sensors I soldered myself, posting the data on a blog that no one read, until the city's stormwater department reached out, intrigued by the drop-in runoff after our first pilot garden. My biggest breakthrough came when I launched the City Pulse program, a distributed web of rooftop hives linked to an open-source map that guided citizens to plant pollinator-friendly species wherever they lived. The City Council, once skeptical, began funding the initiative after a viral video showed a barren parking lot transformed into a meadow teeming with bees, butterflies, and children laughing. The project scaled faster than anyone imagined. Within 3 years, we turned 1,200 neglected spaces into thriving habitats, reduced urban heat islands by 10 degrees, and restored a network of pollinators that now supports over 50 endangered species. The hardest part wasn't the science, it was watching my family's faces when I sent them the first update. I called my mother, "Mom, the rooftop garden is alive, it's beautiful." Her voice trembled. "Are you sure you're not?" I could hear the sarcasm curling at the edges. "Just trust me," I replied. The line went silent and I realized I was standing on a precipice. The past I'd left behind was about to collide head-on with the future I'd built. 6 years later, I received the invitation that would bring me back to the house I once fled. "Family reunion at Aunt Leela's farm," the text read. My heart pounded like a hive in spring. I packed my backpack, now a sleek case filled with drones, GIS tablets, and a USB drive labeled City Pulse, a living map. I drove through the suburbs, past the same strip malls that once echoed my family's laughter, and stopped at the old white-painted house where memories clung to every wallpaper. When I stepped onto the porch, I was greeted not by hugs but by stunned silence. My sister, who once rolled her eyes at my bee hobby, stared at the screen of my tablet. In an instant, a 3-dimensional map unfolded, showing every rooftop garden I'd cultivated across the city, each marked with blooming flowers, buzzing hives, and live data on pollinator activity. This is what you've been doing," she whispered, voice trembling with a mix of awe and remorse. From the kitchen doorway my father emerged, his hands trembling around a framed photograph of my graduation, an image he'd kept hidden in a drawer, dusted over with years of neglect. "Son, I mean daughter," he croaked, "look at all this." He gestured at the screen, his eyes scanning the thriving ecosystems sprouting from concrete roofs, at the green corridors that now stitched the city together like veins. Aunt Leela, the matriarch who had once called me a dreamer, with a tone that sounded like a sigh, approached slowly. She lifted her weathered hand and placed it gently on the tablet. "I never thought we could see this," she said, eyes shining with tears she tried to hide. "You made the world breathe again." The room fell into a hush so thick you could hear the hum of the bees in the background, a sound I'd once imagined only in my fantasies. My brother, who had once mocked the very idea of a bee lady, stepped forward, his face flush with a shame that cut deeper than any insult. "I'm sorry," he blurted, "for laughing. For pushing you away." He glanced at the map, at the data points where his own son now played in a rooftop garden he'd once dismissed as a child's playground. "I see it now, I see what we lost." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a chorus of realization. My mother, who had once called my ambition an embarrassment, placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "You were never an embarrassment," she whispered. "You were the one who saw the city's heart when everyone else was blind." That night, under a sky painted with stars and the soft glow of LED lanterns hanging from rooftop gardens, we sat together on the porch and watched the city pulse with life. The very spaces that had once been dismissed as useless were now thriving, feeding not just bees but entire neighborhoods. Children ran through the gardens, elders tended vegetable patches, and the air smelled of fresh herbs and wildflowers. The moment was more than a victory, it was a reckoning. My family's past scorn had been a catalyst, not a shackle. It forced me to dig deeper, to prove that the impossible could be measured, mapped, and nurtured. In doing so, I learned a truth that now sits at the core of my being. The people who tear you down often do so because they cannot see the light you carry. When that light finally erupts, it doesn't just illuminate your path, it shines back on those who once tried to dim it. I turned to them, eyes full of gratitude and resolve, and said, "We all have a role in this city. Some of us plant seeds, others water them. It doesn't matter where you start. What matters is that you keep planting, keep believing, keep building." Their nods were slow, reverent, and I felt the weight of their apologies lift like pollen drifting on a summer breeze. As the night deepened, the city's lights flickered not as a sign of decay but as a beacon of hope. Somewhere below, a bee landed on a blossom, its tiny legs trembling with purpose. I realized that redemption isn't a single triumph, it's a ripple that expands outward, touching every life that once dismissed you. And in that quiet, transformative moment, I understood the greatest lesson my journey taught me. The only true failure is letting fear silence the voice that knows the world can be reborn. The city breathed, my family breathed, and for the first time in years, I breathed in sync with both. The story was no longer mine alone, it belonged to every soul daring to dream in a world that told them to stay small. And that, dear listener, is the most beautiful redemption of all.